Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I'm your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 193, recording on Friday, August 21st. The guest for you today, you probably know pretty well. Her name is Mina. She is one of the premier NFL analysts on ESPN. She has her own podcast, which is exceptional. And we talked all things Vikings, very much an in the weeds show, going through the defense first and then the offense second. But hopefully it gives you a platform for what's been on my mind and her mind related to the Vikings possibilities and opportunity in 2026. Appreciate Mina hopping on. Much respect to the work that she puts in. So I think you guys will really enjoy the conversation. If you're new here and watching on YouTube, appreciate you being here. Please hit the subscribe button below. It helps us out a ton. And then if you're listening on Apple or Spotify or iHeart or wherever you listen to the podcasts that many of us human beings in the world have these days, please follow us, give us 5 stars, rate, review, all of that good stuff. Before we get to Mina, I do just want to riff a little bit on joint practices. Was a really fun 2 days between the Vikings and the Ravens here at the TCO Performance Center. Awesome to see a lot of really talented players in person. It was very cool to see Randy Moss present. If you haven't heard Miles Price, the Vikings second-year receiver, talk about what it was like having Randy Moss in the receiver room, please go check that out on social media. It was absolutely exceptional. But I said this on the radio Friday morning, like being around Randy Moss, there's very few athletes I've ever been in the vicinity of where their magnetism kind of stands out in that way. So cool to see him. There were a lot of luminaries out there. And then the play / performance on the field, thought it was a lot of really high level work. There's no question that Jesse Minter, the Ravens head coach, and his defense came in very prepared, very aggressive and physical. I thought the preparation for the Vikings pass catchers, being Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Juwan Jennings, if you want to prepare for what you're probably going to get against Detroit, with how physical they like to play, that's a really good test. Marlon Humphrey was really physical. Nate Wiggins, the second-year corner from Clemson, was really good. And then the pressure packages that Jesse Minter and that Ravens staff and that defensive tree, which includes Mike McDonald, the head coach of the Seahawks, they are very precise. They pluck at very specific things. They love using simulated pressures where they're bringing 4, but from all sides and all areas. So thought it from an offensive perspective for the Vikings, definitely stressed the run game and really required them to go to the well Wednesday night and Thursday morning to make some adjustments to their run game for Thursday, which was probably really good. Process, example, just experience for what it's going to be like on a down-to-down, drive-to-drive basis within the season. And they ran the football better on Thursday. Jordan Mason continues to look really, really good just from a body type perspective. And this run scheme that the Vikings have incorporated with Frank Smith, the assistant head coach, and with Keith Carter, the offensive line coach, it's very much a run scheme that for Jordan Mason, he has a lot of experience in, given his time in San Francisco and kind of the similarities. So thought he looked really good. And then Damon Claiborne, yes, on Wednesday, he darted through a bunch of attempted tacklers. Then there was a fumble that's got to get cleaned up. Ball security has to get cleaned up. But then Thursday he exploded around the edge. And I said this on Twitter, but like the way when you're in person, you're watching Damon Claiborne run the football or with the ball in his hands, like there is an electricity factor, a teleportation factor, it's like a glitch almost in terms of when you see him and when you don't. Pretty impressive juice. So definitely impressive to watch him in the run game kind of take the step from Wednesday to Thursday. I thought the pass game, definitely until the last 2-minute period Wednesday was pretty clunky. I thought Thursday definitely took a step, but there were still some just rhythm and timing felt a little I just say not as in sync as you probably wanted it to. I'm not going to overreact to that because I very vividly remember 2024 and Sam Darnold at joint practices in Cleveland against the Browns. So not, it's not worth going crazy over the past game performance. And there were some highlights like Thursday, Kyler Murray hit Jawan Jennings up the right sideline on a deep ball. I mentioned the 2-minute. It was a beautiful throw from Kyler Murray, kind of off his back foot, about 35 yards down the field to Justin Jefferson. And then, I thought there were a couple red zone sequences with Kyler Murray finding TJ Hawkinson that were pretty impressive. JJ McCarthy's days very up and down. Thursday, he had a brutal pick six. Kind of out of the pocket trying to create. But then Wednesday, he did have a really nice over the middle 35-yard touchdown to Miles Price to end the 2-minute. So some ups, some downs, kind of what you expected. Not a lot of layering over the middle of the field from either guy. And I do think that's something that I will be curious about just as this season progresses, is like that is an area of the field that with Kirk Cousins and Sam Darnold, Kevin O'Connell really access. So can they do that with Kyler Murray's stature in 2026? If not, can they find ways to scheme open high crossers that Kyler can kind of see a little bit deeper down the field? Those will be conversations, observations, dissection points throughout the year. I mentioned Miles Price. I mean, the guy's just had a phenomenal camp in every sense of the word. He's caught everything. I hope he plays Saturday. Maybe you guys are listening to this Saturday, but I hope he plays just to watch him do his thing even further. Defensively, it was 2 exceptional days for Brian Flores' group. You have to start with Dallas Turner, and talked about it a little bit with Mina later on, but you just want to see this guy continue to take a step in his 3rd season at 23 years old, I believe still, which is pretty wild, but he really handed it to Ronnie Stanley, a veteran left tackle who has been an all-pro player, has been a 2-time Pro Bowl player. So that was encouraging. And I would just say the way that teammates talked about him after practice was noticeable, just like the way the teammates talked about the defenders in particular, talked about how much fun they were having those 2 days, mixing in their pressures, causing problems for Lamar Jackson. Like there was a lot of energy on that side of the field. And I don't think it was at random. That's something that they kind of want to bring. Mina and I talked about the safety spot, the interior of the defensive line. I think those are, and even the depth at edge rusher, those are positions that I've got kind of my mind on. But the linebacker group, as long as Eric Wilson and Blake Cashman stay healthy, you feel really, really good about what's possible, being able to mix in Ivan Pace Jr. as a blitzer, knowing that Jake Golday continues to develop and progress kind of behind those guys. So defensively, I saw Declan Doyle, the Ravens offensive coordinator, after practice, and it didn't look like it was the most comforting 2 days, I would say. So definitely going to be interesting. I think Mina later in this podcast makes a great point about stopping the run and how critical that's going to be over the course of the season to evaluate. But really, really fun 2 days to be out there. I always love just the opportunity to get up close. Like you watch Zay Flowers get in and out of cuts, and man, that guy moves different. You get to watch Kyle Hamilton and just his versatility. And it made me think like, man, if I'm power ranking NFL players who would fit amazing with Brian Flores defense, there's probably not a lot not a lot of guys who I'm power ranking ahead of Kyle Hamilton, which is definitely not probably the most enjoyable if you're a Vikings fan or a Vikings staffer listening to this. But yeah, so it was really good 2 days, really fun. Looking forward to Saturday's preseason game. And then now we're in the back stretch of training camp. The Vikings will still practice. I will still be present at the TCO Performance Center. We still have a ton of stories to work on certain guys like undrafted rookie Jacob Thomas, on some coaching staff stuff, on the quarterbacks. Like I still think the backup spot, even though Kevin O'Connell has talked about J.J. McCarthy taking the reps with the twos, I still think that's, a curiosity from my standpoint. So we'll be here to cover it all on the Alec Lewis Show and at theathletic.com, where I do my day job, and looking forward to diving into all of it. If you guys have questions on anything that I didn't talk about or you want me to go on more in depth, toss them in the comments section or throw them at us on social media at Alec_Lewis or at Alec Lewis Show on Twitter and Instagram. And I try to respond to as many as possible, even in the Instagram DMs where you can get some one-on-one interaction. So appreciate you guys being here. With that, let's get to some sponsors before our conversation with ESPN's Mina Kimes. All right, first, let's talk about our presenting sponsor, First Resource Bank. If you've listened to the show, if you watch the show, you probably know about First Resource Bank. And if you're aware in the Minneapolis area of who gives you the best banking platform with probably the most connected and nice people in the banking industry in Minnesota, I think you probably know about First Resource Bank. But it's a member FDIC bank in the Minneapolis area run by really good people. Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, Charlie Anderson. These guys are from the Midwest, from this area. They are really connected, like I said, in the Twin Cities, and they're huge Vikings fans. So Tim has been texting me about, how do the quarterbacks look? How has joint practices gone? And meanwhile, I'm using his banking platform online. That has been a saving grace since I moved up here in the Twin Cities. So if you need information on First Resource Bank, their link is in the description, and it's really easy to set up an account and go from there. I also want to talk about Pro MN Athletics. So you guys can probably hear it every episode or see it every episode or see it in the books that I read behind me. Like I genuinely love this game. Growing up in Alabama, it's just a passion of mine to watch it every single weekend. And anything I can do to try to help grow it, I'm very willing to do. And so Pro MN Athletics is a company started by three guys, Kurt, Graham, and Tanner. And a couple of years ago, they're like, how can we lift the tide of youth football development in the Minneapolis and Minnesota area? How can we give kids who want to play in middle school, high school, college, the best possible training, other like-minded kids to be around, really sharp coaches who played in college, like Tanner Morgan, former Gophers quarterback. And so they've set up academies throughout the spring, summer, and winter. They have 7-on-7 leagues throughout the summer. Tanner Morgan trains privately a bunch of the most elite quarterbacks in the Minnesota kind of region. So I would just say if your son or if you have friends who have sons who play football, who want to play at a high level in middle school, high school, or college, please get with Pro MN, and they will do everything that they possibly can to ensure that your son improves, develops, and has an awesome experience while doing it. With that, without further ado, 12 minutes of ramble, and you guys are waiting for it. Here's Mina Kimes of ESPN talking about the Vikings ahead of 2026. All right, Mina, welcome back to the show. We did this last year, and I appreciated your time. It was fun to talk about this very silly team. So how are you?
I'm good. Yeah, I was just telling you that this division, I've been doing division previews in my pod. I saved the NFC North till the second to the last one because the quarterback competition worked out. And I just could not pick it. Like, I think I had like a brain aneurysm. Like, of all the divisions, this one is the hardest to figure out. And the Vikings are part of that picture.
Someone asked me the other day to rank the quarterbacks in the NFC North, and that it in itself felt like it was doing a Rubik's Cube mentally. I will just start you with this. Like, when you think of all the conversations you've had as part of the preview series that you've done on your show, like, where do you think the Vikings rank, or in your mind, where do they rank as far as your interest in observing what becomes of the team in 2026?
Yeah, in interest. It's like top 5 team in the NFL. I just I talked to my friend Greg Rosenthal. We were drafting teams we're most excited to see, and I think I had the Vikings like 3rd, just because of all of the mystery, the possibility. I think they're probably the highest variance team in the division. I mean, the way I see the NFC North is you have 3 teams with awesome offenses and bad defenses. And then you have the Minnesota Vikings, who could be the most balanced team, right? If this Murray thing works out. They're the only team where I feel like there's the capability of having like above average top 10 units on both sides of the ball. But also, if it doesn't work out, there could be a much lower floor. So yeah, they're the Scooby-Doo team of the division is what I call them. And I don't even want to like come down hard with a prediction until I see Murray in action, maybe over the course of several weeks.
It's funny too, because I think understandably, so much of the interest does lie with Kyler and the fit with the offense and the run game with Frank Smith and all of that. But I think some of those conversations almost overlook or avoid all of the defensive personnel changes and some of the youth and just the idea that like Brian Flores and the staff have done a really good job maintaining their standard for multiple years. And it's like, can they continue that? So I guess let's start on the defensive side and we'll save the Kyler conversation because I'm ridiculous. And I guess we'll do that. Like, I mean, I guess the simple way to ask it is like, do you think Brian Flores and this staff and this defense can do it again with a different iteration of personnel?
I think it's so funny because I do a top 10 defenses pod and I had the Vikings and then I took a beat in the top 10, right? And I was like, damn, I'm really like in the same way that we trust Kyle Shanahan, Sean McVay's of the world to put out a top 10 offense every year, regardless of what's going on. I think we're there with Brian Flores defensively. But when you take a step back and look at the depth chart, to your point, there is a lot of change. There's a lot of youth. There's question marks. So you are really leaning heavily on him and his deserved reputation. That said, I like a lot of the young players, and I think that there's decisions they made that to like solidify other parts of the defense that I think create a floor. I think the linebacking group being steady is really significant. And I think also, this is something kind of for the last few years, every time I look at the Vikings, I'm like, they don't really have corners, but I actually think it's a pretty decent quarterback group. Obviously, Murphy's the best, but corner that they have. But around him, they've started to fill out, I think, with competent veterans. So that's no longer a weakness. But yeah, you got questions pretty much every other position on this defense and young players who need to step up.
Yeah, and it feels to me like the pivot points are the really three spots that you left. It's like the interior of the defensive line. Obviously, when you draft, shift off of Jonathan Allen, Javon Hargrave, who definitely had up and down seasons themselves, and shift to Caleb Banks and Dominique Orange, two draftees who definitely, just from my observation and conversations, still need runway to impact things significantly. You're relying a lot on guys like Jalen Redmond and Levi Drake Rodriguez. And then on the edge, in the edge group, Dallas Turner, who looked phenomenal in joint practices against the Ravens, feels like is a massive pivot point. And the safety room is really a question, I think, right now. So of those three, I don't know if it's like what intrigues you most or what would concern you most.
Well, safety right now is a bit of a mystery, and I mentioned this when I was saying, I do worry a little bit about not having Harrison Smith. Your guess is as good as mine. What's going on there?
Undecided.
Whether or not, okay, Josh Metellus can be fully chaotic, unlocked the way he has been. I think what intrigues me the most is Dallas Turner. I had him as an X factor. I do a pod every offseason where I do like an X factor for every team, and he was my X factor because letting Grenard walk was a big bet on him. I know there's contractual factors, but I don't think they do that unless they believe that Turner can take another step. And I think another step is required. I for that pod, I went back and watched all of his pressures in the second half of the season. Obviously, he had a lot of sack production. And there was a lot to like, but I still think there's a lot to work on. A lot of wins were just juice. I mean, he is so explosive. Like his get off is ridiculous. And there are wins. He'll win that way. But I think to become truly like the number one edge and actually live up to his draft status or come close to it, he has to become a more complete pass rusher than what he's been so far in the NFL.
Yeah, I think, and it was interesting, probably midway through last season, I remember saying something on this show of like, the production a little bit statistically for Dallas Turner looks to be there, but I didn't see technical wins against some of the elite tackles that he faced in a way that I felt like was maybe repeatable, and I probably took some flack for it. But I will say, I mean, against Ronnie Stanley in these joint practices, and Ronnie Stanley's now above 30, it was a mix of bull rush, of long arm. I mean, it was interesting. So, and I will say that multiple of the Vikings veteran defenders were their eyes were popping a little bit about what they even noticed from Dallas Turner. So I you're apt, I think, to include him or categorize him as such an X factor. And then the safety room, and I'm curious what you think of this. Like, I've wavered of how much do I put a level of concern on that group? Because if you are blitzing as much as Brian Flores can, does that limit opposing offense's ability to stand in and hit, completions vertically? Like,
Yeah.
I've navigated that world. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think certainly that's part of it, right? I mean, the Vikings defense, you know this obviously very well, really makes you work for it, and there's vulnerabilities in explosive plays. It's funny because, like, they always rank with Flores number 1 in literally everything except for they let up a lot of explosives, and some of that is structural because if you go up against an elite quarterback, Matthew Stafford, I think Jordan Love is capable of those elite throws. Vikings fans might not wanna hear that, but you do if the quarterback is willing to hit those difficult downfield throws in the face of pressure, they are vulnerable there. But that's more by design than by, like, it's not a talent
Sure.
limitation, I think. So I do think Flores is able to compensate for it in some ways. I think, though, equally important to capping explosives, though, would be against the run. And, like, that's again another position where I think about the Vikings and their ability. They're very good at limiting explosive runs. They've lit up some explosive passes, but I think that's something where you do worry a little bit because one of the things teams like to do against this team, because they're so aggressive with their pressures on early downs, is try to find ways to run the football, and they've been outstanding against the run over the last several years. And if you start seeing cracks in that, whether it's because of the safeties or because you don't have, like, a complete edge like Grenard or whatever, that's where I think you start to make life a little bit easier for opposing quarterbacks.
It's interesting that you say that too, because the first half of last year, when Andrew Van Ginkel missed games and Blake Cashman a little bit too, due to injuries, like, I can remember being in Dublin, Steelers, Vikings, and Kenneth Gainwell had
Yeah.
potentially 100 yards that day. I remember the next game, Quinshon Judkins had a phenomenal game on the ground against the Vikings. And then even there was a Thursday night game with the Chargers where Kamani Vidal, well, it was like, who am I watching with Kamani
Yeah.
Vidal against the Vikings defense? And to your point, like, it did feel like when opposing offenses are able to run the football, then the structure, to kind of use your phrase there, like, it feels like cracks do begin to show. And so it does probably add stress to the interior defensive line and the staff to ensure that their scheme holds up in that phase. It's probably it's smart to mention.
Yeah, I mean, Orange is obviously, that's kinda his thing, right? So, hopefully, he can be helpful early on in that regard. I mean, this is such a young you mentioned the defensive tackles. Banks is one of the more boomer bust draft prospects of the first round. I didn't really see a ton out of him early on, so that's something to monitor as well in that regard because the Vikings defense just being so good on first down is so important to what everything else that they do. And yeah, that's where you start to worry a little bit about it.
We'll get right back to Mina in a second, but first, a couple more words from sponsors. First, Aquarius Home Services, your independent authorized Connecticut water systems dealer. It's summer. I believe it's still summer, and that means home improvement season at Aquarius. They know that managing a household and all of the expenses that come with it is no easy task. They also know how important having worry-free water in your home is. Your family deserves water you can trust because you use it every day for drinking, cooking, cleaning, and bathing. That's why they are excited at Aquarius to share their summer trade-in and trade-up program. Trade in your old water softener and trade up to a Connecticut whole home water treatment system. The best part, you can get an additional $500 off on top of their summer sale prices. Say goodbye to hard water, rust stains, and unwanted contaminants, and hello to a cleaner, worry-free water flowing through every faucet all day, every day. It starts with a free water test scheduled today at AquariusHomeservices.com. Aquarius, they earn the right to be recommended. I also want to talk about our good friends at great clips. So if you've got kids, you know that back to school season is a lot. Supply list, shoe shopping, juggling all the schedules. It's not exactly a magical time of year. The Great Clips app, though, that really does work like magic. With just a few taps, you can find a salon nearby, see the wait time, and check in when it works for you. You can even get a message when it's your turn so you know when to pack up the kids and head over. Oh, and the savings, that's where the real magic happens. So when it's time for back to school haircuts, download the Great Clips app. It may not take care of all your back to school to-dos, but it'll definitely make some of that stress disappear. Great Clips. It's going to be great. And now back to Mina Kimes. I've also, that's like the depth part of it. At linebacker, you talked about, I mean, to have Blake Cashman, Eric Wilson still be able to man like that layer of the defense is huge. But Blake Cashman has gotten injured in the past, and you just do wonder if you have to turn it over to Ivan Pace, then you're losing the flexibility that you would have with Blake Cashman in coverage. So, I don't know if I've ever started in the last month and a half a podcast with all defense, but we'll flip to the other side. I mean, you talked about wanting to see Kyler Murray. How has what is your mind and thought process? How is it, evolved from the time that Kyler Murray signed, thinking about the fit with Kevin O'Connell and his system to now? Like, how have you thought about that marriage and what it could be, what it might be, what you want it to be? I don't know.
Yeah. I think it's really fascinating. I know a lot of ink has been spilled. A lot of podcasts have been devoted to what this marriage is going to look like, trying to parse. I think everyone's kind of like looking at both sides of it. You're looking at the Kevin O'Connell side and the way he's adapted his offense to different quarterbacks. He was also in LA where they changed the offense as well. And then you look at the Kyler Murray side of it where, yes, it's been pointed out often, he is primarily not lived in an under center world, but in 2024, you saw some of that with Drew Petzing. Everybody's kind of made the same points. So the question is, okay, but where do those two things meet in the middle? And I think there's a pressure on both sides equally, perhaps, to figure that out. Something I talked about on my show is I'm really intrigued by this run game and how that helps marry these two worlds, because I missed the Frank Smith hire when it happened. And then when I kind of realized that this summer and thought about all the pieces in Minnesota, I was pretty intrigued because coming from Miami, which had this incredibly explosive run game primarily out of the gun and the pistol without a dual threat quarterback, if you had thrown a Kyler Murray into that Miami run offense, it probably would have been incredible with him next to Achane, right? So then you flip over to Minnesota and you wonder, okay, like, is that something they're going, you see it in practice, like, if they rep that, then how do they marry that with a play action passing game? Because you want everything to look the same. Do they find ways to access play action out of the gun the way we've seen in like a Green Bay at times, or in Miami with the downfield RPOs? So I think there's a lot to TBD, and we really won't see it for certain until week 1. But I think there's a real opportunity here for both O'Connell and Murray to show that they both, I think, have, not just like with Murray, the case, the tools, but also the adaptability to make this thing sing.
Yeah. And it's, that was awesome. And I talked to Robert Mays last week, and we're this similar realm of conversation. And I was telling him, like, you draft a 5th-round fullback in Max Bredesen, who I've seen in training camp incorporated in ways that evoke in my mind Alec Ingold in Miami with Frank Smith. And then, you mentioned the RPO stuff, and there have been certain instances where I feel like that's popped up. But and then there's also still the keeper boot stuff and some of the over the middle intermediate area passing concepts that you'd expect. It's just a lot. It's a lot. That my question and what I'm so curious to see is, like, can you chisel it down in a way where it is this clarified identity?
Yeah, it's right, especially because your 1-2-3 punch at receiver is like amongst the best in the NFL, if not. But right, so however, one of the ways to get Jefferson and Addison more favorable matchups is if you do lean more into some of those bigger bodies alongside with them, right? And Jennings, who's one of the better blocking receivers in the tight end or in the NFL, pardon me. Josh Oliver is one of the best blocking. You have a lot of guys who can block, and so I think the deployment of all of them, there's real opportunity here for Justin Jefferson to get more opportunity, kind of like I think about Jackson Smith and Jigba in Seattle in the first half of the season in particular. Seattle loved putting fullbacks, tight ends on the field. They faced so much base defense, and Smith and Jigba was a huge beneficiary of that. I mean, I think I looked this up, but when the Seattle was in 12 personnel over the course of the season, Smith and Jigba averaged 25 yards a play or something insane, right? We always think about, when we think about multiple tight end sets, we always think about the tight ends and not the fact that there's other receivers on the field as well who can benefit from that, right? So I just think by Minnesota, they have all the pieces to do all of the things that every incredibly explosive and successful offense is doing in the NFL right now. But it all has to come together, obviously, and then Murray has to execute upon it, which is sort of the other variable here at the deep ball.
Yeah, and I was pretty surprised, or not. Maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. I went back last night and I was looking at True Media, just efficiency, explosiveness, EPA per play of the Cardinals in 2024. And I guess I knew that was a fascinating offense. I knew Clayton Adams and some of the stuff they did in the run game was really impressive. But I didn't realize that the Cardinals in 2024, from an EPA per play success rate standpoint, they were top 8, I think, in both metrics. And so that offense was maybe more, I don't know if it's down to down efficient than I would have probably just conjured in my mind. But and then you mentioned the deep ball there, but that's been something in camp where there are days where it feels like Kyler Murray places the ball with touch beautifully 40 yards down the field. And then there are other instances where it's why did that ball hang up in the air? And that's going to be picked off in a real game. So I think even for me too, the discernment throughout the season of how much is that deep ball a byproduct of some of the receivers he has or has had versus just his arm talent over the course of his career and how it's evolved, that's even a fascinating potential turning point for the high end of what this offense is capable of.
Yeah, the deep ball is kind of the chicken or the egg thing with Murray that you put out. Some of it, he didn't have deep ball receivers, just didn't, right? But then also he had some weird misses. Maybe some of it has to do with injuries, right? Throwing the ball deep. So there's a zillion questions about it because it looked so good early in his career. And then I think that's one where it's okay, now you're going to be in one of the better situations in the NFL, assuming the offensive line stays healthy in terms of opportunities to throw deep. It's kind of all on you now, my guy. So I don't think he has to be an explosive deep passer for this to be an above average offense, which is obviously where the bar is based on last year. But that to me is the difference between this being the 13th through 20th offense and a legit top 10 is whether or not Kyler could push the ball downfield.
Yeah. You mentioned, recognizing the Frank Smith element of it all. I've talked a lot about Kevin O'Connell's run game over the last 4 years, and obviously the metrics and where they're at where they've been at speak for themselves. But just how have you thought about Kevin O'Connell's run game?
It's quietly improved during his time in Minnesota. I think maybe contrary to the way people feel, if you look at the advanced metrics, it has gotten better every year. Yeah. And they also, like every other offense around the NFL, and you know this because you follow them so closely, but it's characterized as an under center, outside zone run game. But they really started to evolve, obviously running more duo and things like that. So I think it's something when you watch too, he obviously, and this is where the Rams DNA comes in, it's so obvious that he wants this to be a balanced offense where he's able to use the run to set up explosives and things like that.
Mary.
But while it's been efficient, it hasn't been explosive on the ground. For a litany of reasons, offensive line injuries have factored into that, I think, at times. I like the backs. I think they're good. They're absolutely good enough to make it work. But I do think you have the opportunity here now with a dual threat quarterback to really finally, as well as some of the blocking pieces that they brought in that we talked about, to really make this a top 10 rushing attack, which, by the way, it was like 13th in DVOA last year. It was like just outside of it. So it's not an unrealistic goal at all.
Yeah. And I do think, it was interesting for me, even this offseason, going and looking at, the numbers and the evolution or just the progression over time. I do think sometimes it can get lost in it. But it's so funny because I've told people, friends, whatever, like you can squint, I think, and see a world where they are efficient, explosive on the ground, which then does force defenses into a really complex situation of how many defenders do we allocate to Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, and how can we do that in a way that also stifles the run? And so I do think like you can squint and see a really potentially fun vision here.
Right. Well, I think also last year they were pretty efficient despite the fact that they didn't face that many light boxes because for obvious reasons. So, yeah, I think that was kind of contrary. I remember when Dalvin Cook left Minnesota, there was talk about how he was so underrated and good. And it was, where did he go? I remember being like,
I think the Jets, maybe.
Yeah, right. And I remember being like, Dalvin Cook faced like the most light boxes in two-eyed football last year. And he still wasn't that good, guys. Like, it's right. Like, but that's what it should be with these receivers.
Right.
It might not, because if they do end up using more heavy personnel, obviously that'll shift what they face. But like when they have those receivers out there, defenses should be afraid of that, and there should be incredible opportunities. But imagine you've got Bredesen and, I don't know, Josh Oliver, and you've got Jefferson and Addison. From a defensive perspective, that's a math problem. That's a physics problem. How do you solve that? Because if you're trying to stop that ground game, and oh, by the way, there's a quarterback who can keep it and go, those receivers are going to get one-on-one opportunities. So I think just O'Connell has just a tremendous arsenal of players to challenge defenses with and dictate to them.
I would agree. Is there anything with the Vikings beyond the conversation? Is there anything that I don't know, you're interested in?
Look at the depth chart. I mean, offense is fascinating. I mentioned Turner being fascinating. Banks is interesting to me. I think, just generally, I'm interested in seeing what the offense looks like, and then if they stick with it and how it evolves over the course of the season. The other thing is, like I mentioned, within the division, I mean, the other three defenses are bad, y'all. Like, Vikings fans, like, it was, like I said, waited until the end. There were some injuries that kicked in. Like, I kind of couldn't believe how I was like, this is like the Big 12 in Minnesota. Like, it is. So this offense really does have some opportunities here to cook against the divisional opponents.
The tall tale sign for me was the Bears signing Marcus Davenport, who had a presence here, had a presence in Detroit, in some form or fashion. That was declarative in some form. But the division is, I said this to you before we started recording, like, it is so hard to peg what's possible. And I really, from every conversation I've had with people in the league, like, the amount of respect I have for Ben Johnson is at a certain place. I really think the Lions offense could be fun with Drew Petzing, and if they can hold up offensively. But it's interesting, and the Vikings' place in it is a complete puzzle. So appreciate you hopping on to talk about it.
Can't wait to see it. Thank you for having me. You did a great job covering this team. Keep it up.
Thanks, Mina. And that'll do it for episode 193 of the Alec Lewis Show. Like I said at the top, grateful to Mina for taking her time, a very busy schedule that she has, to talk to us on the Alec Lewis Show. Hope you guys enjoyed the conversation. Let me know your thoughts in the comments section, or, as I said at the beginning, on social media at Alec_Lewis, at Alec Lewis Show on Twitter and Instagram. If you're new here and you want to get future episodes on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button. If you're listening on Apple or Spotify, give us 5 stars. Takes about 1 click, and we appreciate it. More stories to come at The Athletic. We are not slowing down at all whatsoever. I am juiced to cover Saturday's preseason game and then get back at it next week with even more But yeah, thank you guys for being here. Looking forward to talking next week. We'll have something. The team's entertaining enough. And yeah, with that, that'll do it for episode 193. Have a great weekend, and we will talk to you very, very soon.